All right, we begin here. South Africa recorded a massive slump in gross domestic product in the second quarter as COVID-19 took its toll on the economy. The economy contracted by 51% when compared to the second quarter of last year. South Africa's economy suffered a significant contraction during April, May and June when the country operated under widespread lockdown restrictions in response to COVID-19. It's the fourth consecutive contraction in GDP. The contraction was broad-based with construction, manufacturing and mining weighing heavy. The only positive contribution came from the agricultural sector. All right, let's get more on this then and some analysis from Ricus Reeders, who's a wealth manager at PSG. A very good afternoon to you, Ricus. Thank you so very much for your time, sir, here on SABC News.
Good afternoon.
Well, what do you make of this figure? Were you expecting this much of a decline? I mean, what do you make of the news currently?
Well, the decline was expected. It came in worse than the sort of general expectation, which was in the order of about 46%, and as you've just said, it was 51%. So the magnitude was a bit more than the market expected, but it's not. I think that's what has not been only happening locally, but worldwide. The slowdown and the lockdown of economies, not only in South Africa but in other countries as well, has had a massive effect on producing goods and also services.
Yeah. How does this speak to the consumer confidence index, Ricus?
Well, I think that's, again, not only locally but also globally. People are looking at GDP numbers coming through for the past 3-4 months, and they say, well, it is bad, but what are we looking to going ahead? And in that sense, consumer confidence is very important because it speaks to the expectations and the hopes of not only the worker on the street, but also the manufacturer, the factory, the miner, going forward. In other words, are things going to go better? And in that sense, the slight increase we saw in consumer confidence locally is a positive step in that direction. And we've also seen in other countries that people are saying, well, going forward, things will recover.
And of course, you mentioned it briefly when we were talking about manufacturing. I mean, manufacturing contracting by 74.9% in the second quarter. Was this a foregone conclusion then, given the fact that we're dealing with this pandemic and, of course, the lockdown?
I think it was, specifically because of the lockdown, but one shouldn't forget that the coronavirus pandemic has just massively impacted what was already a pretty bad story. In other words, we've been contracting since the end of 2019, and that's very well before the pandemic. So we were on a downward slope as far as the economy was concerned. In any case, this has just worsened it.
Yeah, the technology and pharmaceutical sector was generally active. Why did their contribution not have an impact on the final GDP figure?
I think it's not that big a number in the gross GDP to start off with, and with pharmaceuticals specifically, although some medicines did very well, and it's a sort of over-the-counter aspirin type of thing. Other medicines, specifically prescription medicine, for example, didn't benefit quite as much. In other words, people were fearful to go into a chemist, and obviously also the type of drug that you would normally use when somebody is hospitalized for operations or causes other than COVID was also less prescribed because the sort of non-essential type of surgery or procedure was delayed as space were made for people that needed treatment as a result of COVID.
Yeah. The reality, Ricus, is that people are already sort of behaving, and I suppose companies too, already behaving as though we're on level 1 of the lockdown. So will the official move to level 1 of the lockdown further bring an improvement to GDP numbers, or it will be really much of the same, given that people have really sort of behaved as though we are on level 1 in any case?
Well, I think a lot of that depends on demand. And with demand, I don't only mean local demand, but global demand.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that depends on whether you can actually export. You know, already with tourism, when will countries allow people to either go and visit them or allow people in? So specifically locally, that's a huge part of our GDP. In other words, one might go to level 1, but does it mean tourists will be allowed to come in, and specifically from which country? Because we're already seeing that there's countries will say, well, we will allow people from country 1 because there's very little infection going on, but we're not allowing people from country number 3, for example, because the levels of infection in that country are still very high. So it depends on, as I said, export, import, what the demand is globally, and then of course also locally, how soon specific sectors of the economy will recover.
All right, interesting indeed. I'm sure we'll keep an eye on that. Thank you very much for giving us your time. Then Ricus Reeders, who's Wealth Manager at PSG. Thanks for your time.